Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's me from the History Guy. Today we're gonna meet an ancient philosopher you probably haven't heard of. So let's get into it. He was a Stoic philosopher who lived from around 150 to 220 AD. That makes him a pretty obscure figure in Stoicism. He's not one of the big three. You know, Epictetus, Seneca and Marcus Aurelius. But he was still important enough that there are plenty of references to him by other figures. And so we're gonna talk about who he was, where he came from, what his legacy is today. Now you may recognize that name because it's the birthplace of another famous philosopher, St. Paul, though they were born several centuries apart. Athenodorus' father was a freed slave, which might explain why Athenodorus wanted to make philosophy his career. After all, it was unusual for former slaves to have sons who became philosophers. According to the historian Cassius Dio, when Hadrian came to power in 117 AD, he invited all the leading philosophers from around the empire to come to him for instruction. It's been suggested that Athenodorus was Hadrian's lover, but there's no real evidence for this, and it's likely that this claim is just a byproduct of the fact that same-sex relationships were more common in the ancient world than they were in ours. However, there's another philosopher named Plutarch who wrote a similar work, and he includes a long section about Hadrian's ancestry. So we do know some of the details. Apparently, Hadrian wasn't actually related to the previous emperor, Trajan, despite the fact that Trajan had adopted Hadrian as his heir. For example, he claimed that Hadrian only pretended to like Athens because he wanted to seem cultured. According to one account, the people of Athens hated philosophy, so Athenodorus taught in secret. Unfortunately, only fragments of these works survived. So we don't know exactly what he wrote or how it compares to other Stoics like Epictetus or Seneca. If you're not familiar with Plato, he was one of the most famous Greek philosophers, along with Aristotle. And Platonism had a major influence on the development of Stoicism. So it makes sense that Athenodorus would want to incorporate Platonic ideas into his own work. What we do know is that he published 30 separate works, many of them dealing with questions of Stoic ethics and psychology. Another famous dialogue is called Phaedo, which discusses the immortality of the soul. In another work, he discussed the proper way to respond to abusive people. And he also wrote about how the Stoics understand emotions like anger and fear. So Athenodorus covered a wide variety of topics. And while we don't know much about what he wrote, we do know that his work was highly regarded by later Stoics. These are both topics that the Stoics also cared about. And Athenodorus may have explored those issues in his own writings. But this probably isn't true. It's more likely that he simply taught at a school founded by one of his predecessors, like Cleanthes or Zeno. And he said that Hadrian abandoned his interest in philosophy once he became older. In addition, the Emperor Hadrian kept Athenodorus by his side for 15 years and reportedly loved his company, which shows that Hadrian found Athenodorus to be a wise and insightful teacher. But these are just Plutarch's opinions. And there's no reason to think that Hadrian stopped being a Stoic after meeting Athenodorus. Instead, Hadrian's great-grandfather was a man named Agrippa, who was the son of a freed slave and an Italian woman. In any case, the two remained close until Athenodorus' death in 180. So apparently Hadrian tried to make this work in his favor by commissioning an elaborate genealogy that traced his lineage back to mythical Trojan kings, then through legendary heroes, all the way back to the gods themselves. But as you can imagine, this kind of genealogical revisionism didn't impress everyone. Plutarch thought it was ridiculous, and he mocks Hadrian for trying to legitimize himself in this way. They gave him lectures on rhetoric, poetry, and philosophy, but none of them impressed him. Then he summoned Athenodorus, who must have been recommended by one of the others, and asked him the same question, what he could teach him. To which Athenodorus replied, "Philosophy, sire, or rather life." And then he began to expound on the Stoics' ideas of virtue, duty, and living in accordance with nature. Epictetus, another ex-slave, famously said that it was actually fortunate that he had been enslaved since it made it possible for him to earn his freedom and pursue philosophy. So maybe Athenodorus felt similarly. Tarsus was located in Cilicia, which was a region located along the southeastern coast of the Mediterranean. These days it's part of Turkey, but in the ancient world, it was its own independent kingdom until it was absorbed into the Roman Empire in 67. So Athenodorus would have been born into a Roman province. So this is Athenodorus Cordylion. But first, I want to tell you about our new show. And that he had a son, though eventually his wife left him and took their son with her. The Stoics believed that you shouldn't become emotionally attached to things because you can't control them. But it doesn't seem like that was always easy for Athenodorus, since he did become quite upset over his wife leaving him. Nonetheless, he used this experience as the basis for one of his philosophical treatises, which was titled On His Wife's Departure, showing that even Stoics can get dumped. Now Nick is the host of a popular philosophy podcast, and he's also a practicing psychotherapist. So when I say that he's perfectly suited to host a series on ancient philosophy, I mean it. In the first episode, which you can check out right now, he talks about how the Stoics dealt with grief, drawing from letters written by Cicero to his brother who had recently died. It's a really powerful conversation, and it's given me a lot of insight into how the Stoics thought about death, family, and loss. This is really stuff that everyone can use and apply to their own life. As some of you may know, we just launched our second channel, which will be linked down below. There we're going to cover all sorts of history-related stuff like mythology, history news, weird history, all kinds of stuff. We're also going to have some videos over there that we see ain't quite put here because they read just a little too risque. In any case, the reason I mention this channel is because we have a brand new series called Ancient Philosophy for the Modern World, which is hosted by my good friend Nick Piccigallo. Now if you're more of an audio person, then you're in luck. Because that very same interview is also available as a podcast, which you can find through various platforms. Also, if you subscribe to the channel, you'll be able to watch each new episode as soon as it comes out without any ads or sponsorships. So check that out. And now back to today's video. Athenodorus was born in the city of Tarsus. We don't know much about his early life, but according to the Suda, a Byzantine encyclopedia compiled in the 9th century AD, as far as his personal life goes, we do know that he was married at one point. The thing that Athenodorus is most known for today is his relationship with the Roman Emperor Hadrian. Hadrian was so taken by these teachings that he immediately invited Athenodorus to be his personal tutor, and the two became quite close. During their time together, Hadrian commissioned Athenodorus to write an account of his genealogy, which he did. Though unfortunately, it's been lost to antiquity. In the ancient world, it was generally believed that the most important quality for a ruler was to be descended from a king of the same bloodline. Still, we should take what Plutarch says with a grain of salt, given that he wasn't particularly fond of Hadrian. Athenodorus is also credited with helping to found a school of Stoicism in Athens, though again, the details are sketchy at best. Athenodorus did, however, publish a number of philosophical treatises. What's most interesting is that he seems to have tried to synthesize Stoicism with Platonism. For example, one of Plato's most famous dialogues is called The Republic, and it deals with what justice is and how society should be governed. We also know that Athenodorus published a dialogue on the subject of love, as well as one on friendship. Epictetus mentioned Athenodorus by name and cited his work several times. So clearly Epictetus thought he was an important philosopher. Sadly, most of Athenodorus' work has been lost, but what remains demonstrates that he was an important figure in the history of Stoicism. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking it. And as always, thanks for watching.